Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. We are gathered here today for the third global call for all of you as digital delegates to this year's high-level political forum on sustainable development. And we're very excited for anyone who might be joining us for the first time as part of this delegation. Welcome to you. My name is Teresa Blumenstein, and I am the coordinator of the Justice Coalition of Religious, or JCoR. And I am here as a friend and guide to you in navigating and preparing for this forum, which is happening in July. But as with so many conferences and fora through the UN system, there is much work to be done well before the conference itself. And so we have been learning and preparing together for the last several months to get ourselves properly oriented and familiar with the material, with the forum itself and how it is organized, as well as the different groups with whom we are able to connect as a way of being part of the process. So it's been a while since we were all together on the same call, and those who were with us last time or who saw the recordings of our last call will know that there were a few assignments, as it were, or follow-up tasks from our last call, one of which was that you were each invited to follow or virtually participate in some way in the regional forum for sustainable development, because each of our global regions have a regional forum on sustainable development in advance of the big global level forum that happens in July. And if you were not able to follow those live when they were happening, I also sent around links to recordings of most of the meetings that were part of those fora. So hopefully some of you had an opportunity to see at least one meeting from your own region's forum. And so during our time together today, we will have an opportunity to share any ideas or observations that you have taken away from following all or part of your own region's forum. And then we will also have time to check in and to share with one another our experiences so far of another assignment, which was to try to make contact, to communicate with a civil society network in your own country that is doing some kind of monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals as a way of seeing how active they are and if they are planning to create any report or submit any report on progress in your country during this year's forum in July. And then at the very end, after we've kind of shared all of our updates and perhaps challenges and questions with regard to making those connections, we will also just begin to look ahead and think about our own plans for how we are going to be providing our own insights and our own input, our own reflections in response to the government reports that each of your governments will be submitting on their progress toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And that input will come in the form of what we are calling the JCoR SDG Lab. So I will talk about the format of that a little bit toward the end of our meeting as a way of just introducing it and giving you lots of time between now and July to think about how you might like to contribute to one of the sessions of that lab. So now that we have our overview, I would like to invite us all into a place for that sharing and that reflection and that community by beginning our session today with a prayer. Gracious God, we are your beloved. Even in our unfinished state, you take delight in what we are and in what we will become. Help us to claim for our own your gentle leadership in our lives. Help us to know you are always hoping for more for us and from us, for our nations and from our nations, for our planet and from our planet. Give us the strength and peace of heart to be filled with your power. Give us the courage to use that power to establish justice. Give us faith in resurrection so that we may be patient and persistent in our journey toward your reign. Amen.
Amen.
Wonderful. So I add this slide in the middle. Those who read English will see it says delegate voices, because I'm happy to say that unlike our first two calls together, this call will be an opportunity for you all to speak quite a bit more than you have in the first calls where I was giving a lot of input. And so today the focus is on your voices and your experiences thus far in the process of preparing for this forum, and for some of you perhaps attending meetings of your regional forum. So as I mentioned, we'll hear about your experience with the regional forum, your experience attempting to make contact with a civil society network monitoring SDGs in your country. And if you have also tried this, you can share your experience attempting to join the VNR, or Voluntary National Review team, that will respond to your own government's progress report on the SDGs. And some of the questions that you can use to guide your reflection as we share today are, first of all, what are your reflections from your region's forum for sustainable development? And have made any success with making connection with the civil society network in your country? And have you had any success joining the Voluntary National Review team for your country, if you did attempt to do that? So we will start with reflecting on the regional fora for sustainable development. And ways that I think are helpful to think about really any meeting that I have ever attended in the UN space kind of follows these same lines, which is to ask myself, of all the things that I'm hearing and everything that was said in the meeting, what of the information that was shared is in alignment with my own experience? Where did I see or hear conflict between what was being said and my experience? And then finally, what ideas were missing or absent from the conversation? What are the additional insights or recommendations that I wish would have been said and that I would have added to the conversation if I had the opportunity. And so for those who have had the chance to view or follow at least one meeting of your region's forum, I'll invite you to just take a couple of minutes, if you have not already, to organize your thoughts. So we'll just take two quiet minutes with these questions. And then after that, I will invite anyone from any region who wishes to begin in some sharing about your experience of the forum. So we'll just take hold on. First, we'll take a question from Paul Ramat, and then we'll have our quiet reflection. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa, for this opportunity. I attended the Africa Forum on Sustainable Development, from 23 to 25. So this forum focused on 5 key issues or themes, priority themes. It's about eradication of poverty, the theme of the high-level political forum. Let's also talk about summit for the future, and then the forum also prioritized on young people in the context of Summit for the Future and the Agenda 2030. And there's a roundtable discussion on VNR and voluntary local reviews, VLR, and roundtable on statistics system and data. What I heard, I didn't attend all these sessions. I focus on the SDG 1, eradication of poverty. What I heard from these discussions, the main consensus during the forum or the discussion is about issue of finance, about debt distress, and also the concern about young people. And the outcome of this forum is the issue 2 outcome documents called Key Messages and Addis Ababa Declarations. And about the SDGs under review, from five SDGs under review this year, 4 SDGs need to be accelerated. But I have paid special attention on the SDG 13. This says that it's reverse in progress. The others are quite some progress, but SDG 13 is a reverse in the progress. I pay attention on SDG 1, eradication of poverty. In the context of Africa continents, the key factors affect poverty the key factor is the mentions among others like climate change, terrorism, health crisis, especially COVID-19 and Ebola virus, and the influx of refugees within and among these countries. And from these discussions, they propose some key messages to address the issue of poverty, eradication of poverty. One focus on the suggest or the emphasize on comprehensive reform of the global finance architecture to facilitate foreign investment for African countries, and also provide assistance for African nations in managing their debts burdens to unlock resources that apply to poverty reduction programs. And also the purpose for poverty reduction must be placed at the top of national development agendas with adequate resources allocated to it. And also the emphasis on enhancing domestic governance and empowering the youth to reduce this poverty. And they pay special attention for particular groups, especially for women, young people, and people living with disabilities and vulnerable groups, and also for emphasis on the social protection programs. Yeah, that is both in line with in these discussions. I think from my perspective is about I agree with the issue of how to reduce or to cancel the debts of developing countries, including in Africa, because they have a big burdens with this debt, the financial debt on the developing countries, including in Africa. And I've also pay special attention on the issue to address the issue of poverty, to address the issue of poverty through natural resources, especially to use the critical minerals, and we know that Africa is home 30% of critical minerals, and they see that one way to address the issue of poverty and climate change in Africa through use this critical minerals or minings. I have a mixed feelings about that issue. So yeah, that is what I heard and what I from Africa Forum on Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Paul, for giving the first word and offering one kind of template for people's sharing of reflections, and I want to emphasize that there are many different ways that we can approach our sharing today. So if you have more to say than Paul had or less, don't worry. There's no one particular format for our sharing together. So if feel free to follow Paul's example if it works for you. But also if you have different style of comments that you want to share, this space is open for comments, both long and short, and technical and non-technical. So this is an open space for any reflections. And I will still give you the 2 minutes I promised of peace and quiet as you maybe organize some of your thoughts. But I do want to offer, because it may be helpful as you reflect, Paul mentioned an important term that is very common in UN conferences, but is not so common in normal conversation, which is social protection. And I just want to clarify that is a term that we use for the whole kind of umbrella, the whole tent of different kinds of social programs that provide for basic needs of the population, typically in categories of having kind of a minimum income, minimum amount of money coming into a household to meet the expenses of the household. Often social protection includes policies on provision of education, provision of healthcare as well, or shelter and housing. These are all kind of considered under the social protection tent. So if that term has come up for you in the meetings you attended, or if it's unfamiliar, that's what is meant when we use the term social protection. And Paul did give us some other good ideas to respond to, especially for the others who went to the Africa Forum. But I will give you the 2 minutes of quiet now, and then we will come back to share more after that.
My microphone is not muted.
Yeah, yes, we hear you, Isabel.
Sorry, I'm not hearing something.
That we were just in quiet for reflection, so you weren't missing anything.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and with that, I will call us back from our reflection. I'm sorry that it is a short time, but I hope perhaps you had some ideas already coming onto the call today. And just to recall the first few ideas that were put onto the table by Paul in his reflection on the Africa Regional Forum. He spoke specifically about there was an emphasis on the importance of international debt forgiveness or relief because it's particularly important for many nations in Africa that are spending a lot of money paying back not only their debts, but interest payments on their debts that are sometimes, as I believe I have read, 2, 3, or 4 times the amount of money that they're currently spending on social programs and social protections. And so if they were not having to spend that money on interest payments, it would be available for those very important social investments. So that was very much an emphasis in the conversation of the Africa Regional Forum, which is something that we have been hearing about at global level meetings as well, as particularly important for the African region. And then the other emphasis that Paul mentioned was that on poverty reduction related to SDG number 1, and that an important strategy for poverty reduction was an emphasis on providing opportunities for youth, empowerment for youth, especially persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. And finally, and as Paul mentioned, this is a bit of a controversial point, but that one of the economic opportunities that is on the table for many African nations is the availability of valuable minerals. He mentioned 30% of critical minerals can be found in African nations, which I'm sure we could probably have a long discussion about, the potential to help and the potential to harm that comes from the mining and selling of those minerals. And we could certainly have some of that discussion here today. I expect more of you probably have thoughts and reflections on that topic too. So perhaps since we've already heard a little bit about the Africa Forum, maybe I could ask if there's anyone else who would like to speak about the Africa Forum specifically. We could go to you next.
I think I'll come in here now, Teresa, if I may, from South Africa.
Yes, please.
Yes, so I've been listening to the recordings from the Africa Forum. So, so our country perhaps is a little bit different. We're in the very south part of Africa. However, much of what was said now, I've also experienced here in South Africa. I heard over the weekend at our Catholic Schools Conference that South Africa is the most indebted of the African countries. And that is due to, I would presume, the COVID pandemic, our energy, and so on. And also the amount of poverty that's in the country and the social grants that need to be given so that people can perhaps just meet their very, very basic needs. So it's a problem that I'm experiencing firsthand here. Also at school, we're a fee-paying school. So some of the schools in South Africa would be no-paying schools. And we have found recently that the number of parents who are unable to pay for school fees have increased. So definitely unemployment has risen, which then also it's a regression on the Sustainable Development Goals, because earlier, a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, 2018, we were showing good economic growth. Our unemployment rate was coming down. That is now has regressed because it took a wobble. It is stabilizing, but there's much to do. We have many people in our country that have come from the neighboring countries, Zimbabwe in particular, and unfortunately, due to certain laws that have now come into place, these people have no option but to go back because their visas or their let's say not their visas, but their refugee status and work permits are not being renewed. So there's a lot of pressure within South Africa to give the South African citizens employment, but it then is at the expense of our migrants, our immigrants. So that's again in conflict with each other. So I'm not quite sure what the future is going to hold. We have to be positive. And on that note, I have seen a lot of, because although I'm a Catholic school and I'm also answerable to the Department of Education, and I've seen a lot of information coming through encouraging schools to become greener, to recycle. And that has come in the last 18 months only. So where schools are now promoting that within. So for our school, we have always done that. Well, since, 10 years back, even 15, but not so the government schools. So they are now emphasizing reduction of plastic, awareness of what's happening with the oceans, climate warming. But it's just, that's recent. So that's very positive. And then also in our shops, I've seen quite a reduction in packaging and that sort of thing. So where we're going to go with the five, the no poverty, zero hunger, and the climate action will we have to be seen. But certainly there's much to do in the 6 years until we're supposed to reach it. So that's just my thoughts on it. I don't really have any insights or recommendations, except that I know that education turns lives around. And the only way we can instill awareness is perhaps, or one of the big ways is in schools around awareness, but the awareness must be heartfelt so that it's spurred to action. So it's the challenge around that too. Thank you. I don't know if that answers some of those, sort of thoughts that you've asked us to, share.
It's excellent, Vanessa. Thank you very much for your sharing. So we now have a few more ideas on the table from the Africa Forum. We have the additional element of unemployment, even where it was improving before the pandemic. We're now seeing it moving backwards. The element of migration that Paul mentioned, in South Africa, you're seeing specifically a lot of migrants coming either originally for Zimbabwe or perhaps kind of having come in transit through Zimbabwe, who maybe got initial visas but are not being renewed. And there's a tension there between the interests of opportunities for migrants to work and trying to improve the employment rates for the native population. And then you're seeing some improvement, actually, which is positive with regard to national endeavors to take action on climate and to reduce our negative human impact on the earth, which is catching up to things you have already been doing for a long time, which is always a good sign when you see government start to reflect our faith-based action more and more. Thank you for that sharing. Is there anyone else that wants to share something from the African region? Yes, Bridget Rose.
Thank you, and thank you for sending the talks that we could listen to, because I wasn't in Addis Ababa last week, but I have listened to several of the inputs, and something that struck me was the honest admission that most African, I think all African countries, are falling behind. They are not meeting their stated targets in the SDGs. And I was relieved to hear that honesty. I can confirm and agree with what Vanessa said in her sharing, but what I also between urban and rural. And in the urban areas, there are more efforts for opportunities for recycling, etc. In some of the rural towns, and much of South Africa is rural, there is not the opportunity. So there's huge discrepancy between urban and rural. I also picked up a lot of discussion about the finance, and 51%, I think, or 57% of Africa spending goes on paying the interest of the debt, which is a terrible amount. You've already referred to that. I also don't have any additional insights. I'm still learning very much as we go along. And so my experience doesn't conflict with the reports. I wanted to ask a question, because in the papers that were shared, there was reference to the 2030 agenda for the SDGs, but in Africa, a 2063. And that's Africa's own, something about the Africa we want. And I wondered if there's a danger of concentrating on when they don't reach the 2030 targets. We can talk about the 2063. I needed some clarification about the difference between the two. And thank you, Teresa.
Thanks very much, Bridget Rose. And to your question, I believe that the 2063, I think of it as kind of a vision document for the continent of Africa. And so it's a little bit less technical than the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the 2030 agenda for the whole world. In that it illustrates a specific vision for progress towards in specific areas for African nations, but doesn't have the technical goal structure with, you know, a measurement structure built in the way that this SDGs do. I would have to confirm this, but I believe that both documents were drafted in kind of the same era, sort of similar timing. And so the goal or the objective of creating a specific document for Africa was really to be able to bring together the members of the African Union in a more specialized process of creating a vision that was specific to the many contexts within Africa, which are perhaps different from priorities that were being highlighted more in the global agenda. So it was just a way of establishing more of a regional vision. That's my take on it anyway. But they are meant to be kind of mutually supportive. I don't see, you know, conflict between the two, but just that the Africa document for 2063 is just meant to focus more on the specific challenges and specific hopes that have come from across the African continent, and just give a little bit more voice and a little bit more detail to that vision. Next, we'll go to Isabel Izika, and then after that, we'll go back to Paul.
Thank you very much. I will talk in French because I prefer to speak French. This is the language that I know better, so I will talk in French. So I will share my reflection on the African Forum. I was attentive to this poverty topic, poverty in Africa, and always talking about debts. But Africa actually has the majority of mining resources. And every time we learn that African resources are going to abroad countries. So this is something that I find interesting. So this rate between resources and poverty, and also people living in rural areas. So I think that when we talk about African poverty, we should think carefully. We should think of resources, and we should also commit to work with our governments. In fact, resources are not used by African people. So they may be used to attain sustainable development goals, but this is a government issue that has to be dealt with by governments together with African people, namely civil society. It is a difficult task, for sure. Well, it is not difficult, but it becomes difficult because we do not want to share, to exchange. I don't know how people, civil society, may really be together with governments in order to sit around the table, think together, and finding solutions to such issues. These solutions won't come from abroad. We have regular meetings. We set some specific goals to attain. So we may be able to do everything we want, but if we are not aware, if our governments are not really committed in order to stop those who keep African poverty, we will remain at the same level. So resolutions won't be complete. This is the reflection I would like to share right now. It is not easy. If you come here, you have to consider each country and consider the specific country, specific situation in each country, and try to find the way to convince governments. This is the easy solution that I can envisage. I don't know how, I don't know to what extent this will be possible, but this is the only solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that perspective, Isabel, and such a key idea that in the history of efforts to develop the world, that we see a net flow of resources out of the African continent. And at the same time, there's much discussion of people sending aid into Africa, but we can think of, so much more kind of flowing out of the bottom as a little bit more is poured in the top, as an important image or idea for the history of our approach to development. And that's something to always be vigilant for, especially in the African context. Paul, I think you wanted to say something else. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. 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 Yes, and thank you for pointing that out. So Winifred has a link in the chat box to the document that Bridget Rose mentioned, the 2063 document for the Africa we want. And there's also a link there that Paul shared to the report from the Africa Regional Forum. So both of those are available in the chat box if you wish to read them. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on insights from the African region or from the African Forum? Okay. Then perhaps we could move on to invite our other big region from which we have many participants is from Latin America and the Caribbean. So perhaps if anyone would like to
América
share
Latina y
any reflections from that region, you are most welcome to share now. Yes, please go ahead, Melba. As you wish.
I'm going to speak in Spanish better. So my impression in the sessions that I could watch, because I haven't seen all of them, but I've watched several of them. Something that struck me was that the presentations were a bit overly optimistic. In Chile and in Costa Rica, we are moving forward, and we have put several programs in place, and the investment was positive, and I haven't heard anything about the impact of internal policies on migration, for example. I mean, nobody discussed the challenges or the failures, because there are so many people who are desperately looking to emigrate from Latin America because they have not the basic needs covered in their countries. And so of course, everything that was reported was very, very good and positive, but I felt that they were not approaching reality. They were not mentioning what was reality, like the impact of the pandemic, because everybody knows how was the huge impact of the pandemic at a general level, but nobody approached the emotional impact of the pandemic, for example. And this is also very important, very important. So I would like to talk about a line that is presented in the regional assessment report on the natural catastrophe risk in Latin America, that was presented by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk. And I read that report, and what drew my attention is that the impact of natural disasters is growing in the region. And this report says that it is very important to revert this trend following several recommendations of the Sustainable Development Policy. And there is a table that is very revealing. It shows the countries that have suffered the highest losses, infrastructure losses at a global level. And I am from Honduras myself. And then, you know that my country was hit by several catastrophes, and Haiti as well. And Canada, United States are among the countries that suffer less losses, infrastructure losses, which means we are in disadvantage on the social part. So it struck me that the countries that are smaller and have less infrastructure or are very fragile infrastructure are the ones that cannot resist natural disasters. So, and they were approaching also the investment cost. Anytime that they invest in a country after a natural disaster, they pretended that the country should be covering the cost of the investment, because they feel like they were paying for death instead of investing in life. I don't know how to explain it better. There is a kind of unbalance there. And they were also talking about a solution based on the private-public participation. So they all agreed that the best way to achieve a sustainable development is that all the political stakeholders are united in a single front together with the private sector, the civil society, etc. So I think this is really a good task for our countries in Latin America, that all stakeholders get together and that civil society is there to act as a memory holder, so that we can achieve a good governance and sustainable development. So I don't know how to explain how my feeling is after the regional forum. I feel that we are still working, and that in Latin America we are in process of analyzing the SDGs, but we don't know exactly how to analyze them properly, because we always say what we're going to do, but then we are not held accountable and we don't achieve the goals that we marked for ourselves. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Melba. I think you have reminded me of a expression that was common in my family, that I will change a little to make it better understood in global terms. But we would say that a gram of prevention is worth a kilogram of cure or remedy. Which is to your point about investment in death instead of life. To say, you know, money, we find money after a disaster has happened and people are suffering. But for some reason, we can never find that money to prevent the suffering. And we could spend much less to prevent suffering than we do in cleaning up the mess afterward. And you also make an important connection with a point that Paul made at the beginning, saying that also in the African Forum, there was a mention of moving backward on SDG number 13 about climate action. And so we can see that backward movement, as we all know very well, you know, the climate action is not isolated by nation or by region, and the impact of inaction is not isolated by country or region. And perhaps the climate is one of the ways we are best able to learn how connected we are, how interdependent we are. So if we don't act in every region, then we will all be suffering. And as you mentioned, very importantly, those who have often contributed the least to the problem are the ones who will suffer the most, or at least the most immediately. And we can never forget that in these conversations, especially when those who are contributing the most, and therefore who have the most influence on making a change, need to hear about the experiences in places where people are more vulnerable to loss of infrastructure that may result in loss of education or healthcare systems, that can lead to, you know, the breakdown of the whole social fabric and structure. And I see the hand of Mari Cruz, who will probably want to speak a little bit about that same subject. So I will go to Mari Cruz next.
Thank you very much. I wanted to comment a little bit on the Forum of Latin America and the Caribbean. I agree with Melba's point of view. What drew my attention was already mentioned, but I heard a lot of percentages from the whole region and the achievement of the SDGs in the region. And they talked about a 22%, only 22%. That's the level of achievement. After 46%, that is half of it. That means that we are moving towards the SDGs, but we are far, far away from achieving them before 2023. And what is even worse, 32% of backward movement. And that is, I suppose it's a realistic view. I don't have the data to confirm it, but it coincides with my view on site as well. And I saw many people that are concerned about this. And there were some dialogue on how it is already 2024. And that means our actions need to be more defined, better defined and better aligned if we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Well, of course, we know that we are not going to be able to achieve all of them, but at least some. And there was they were talking also about transitions, that we might need to establish a transition time due to the effects of the pandemic. Then I believe that the SDGs that are tackled this year in the forum are very basic. They need to be prioritized because without them, it is impossible to move forward to other SDGs at all. So if these 5 factors are not taken into account, all others won't be possible at all. There were talks on food systems, energy, education, which is another SDG, but it needs to be at the base of sustainable development. Also employment and social protection, which is basic. And climate action. Something that I believe to be important and that needs to be taken into account is digital connectivity. Our region cannot be isolated in our access to technology. But of course, if we compare that objective with hunger or something more basic, then it doesn't look like it should be a priority, but we believe that it is important as well. I agree with what was mentioned, that the most vulnerable parts of the population need and that through synergy and in union if we want to move forward. And what I missed when we were talking about the objectives of peace, justice, and solid institutions, I believe that in Latin American countries and the Caribbean, there is a serious lack of peace. And that's what Melba mentioned. There are some basic conditions that need to be there if we want to move forward. And peace is one of them. People are migrating not just because of economic factors, but due to a terrible insecurity, violence, and there is and lack of justice in the institutions, which are not giving an answer to this situation. And this was very relevant for me as well, because most or many of the countries in our region don't have the resources to give an impulse to sustainable development if they don't have peace at all. And that is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maricruz. And again, for making that connection that we also heard from South Africa about the role of education in our transition to sustainable societies. And even though it is not one of the priority themes for this year, certainly the community of religious in the world knows a lot about education and understanding that we need to incorporate any change we hope to see that is permanent, needs to be incorporated into our plans for education, so that we can sustain the work to a more sustainable way of living. And that means passing ideas and tools to the next generation. And as you said, that also means that if information is going to be available, we need to always have attention on digital connection, which is vital, even as food is vital and housing is vital. We need not to lose sight of availability of information and opportunities for connection, because they are also vital to our success. So thank you for your sharing. And I also see the hand of Joel Gaspar Beltram. Joel?
We're talking from Brazil with Susana Coutinho. We did not watch the transmissions of all the videos of the regional forum, but we did watch some parts, and we're going to share in two modes. First of all, talking about the forum in general, and then more specifically about our country, which is Brazil. So we share the same ideas of that the two previous speakers, but we just want to add about the active participation of young people, original peoples, civil society in this search for being successful with the goals of sustainable development. And also we need public policies to strengthen these experiences, economical and social experiences, and also take care of the children, of women, of people with disabilities, and also the elderly population. And we also have to think of actions that protect the communities and the ecosystems. And when we think about Brazil, what calls our attention in this journey that our country has developed in the search to reach these goals, the issue of sustainable development, the participation of the population together to be able to reach these goals. We talk a lot about the strengthening of democracy and the instances so that society will also have an idea of everything that's happening and can participate actively in all of this. And Brazil has adopted, together with the main goals, has also adopted for this year the goal number 18 that talks about the ethnical, racial commitment, racial equality. So together with the other goals, which are targets for this year, we are voluntarily working on this goal number 18, which deals with racial equality and also fighting hunger, inequality, deforestation, and climate emergencies. Another question that has called our attention of a Brazilian representative in the regional forum was the issue of the increase of partnerships between countries in South America. And in this context, Brazil has a special participation because it's now over 100 years that we are at peace with all our neighbors here in America. And this is something positive. And it contributes also to help in the strengthening of partnerships of the southern companies for us to together reach our goals.
Thank you very much, Joel and Susanna, who worked together with you. And you brought up an interesting additional point for us to
Você
consider.
falou sobre ponto adicional para considerarmos.
In that we can also be ambitious beyond what we see in the goals as they were presented. As you have said, in Brazil, you're adding
Como
another
você
goal.
falou, estamos adicionando outro objetivo.
Vivian, I think I'm hearing your interpretation. I think it needs to switch. Good. So I was just saying that we have an interesting new idea that we just heard from Joel and Susanna about the addition of ambitions and ideas beyond the constraints of the goal, the 17 goals, and that there was an identified need for emphasis on racial equality in Brazil. And it's wonderful to always keep our minds open to new ideas and to what is missing, and think especially of our own nations. If there is an important point that is either not visible at the surface of the SDGs, that we can bring it out in a stronger way. For example, many of you have mentioned migration, and that is embedded in the SDGs, but it's a little bit hidden inside goal number 10 on reducing inequalities. And so wherever we see a need, if there is a big issue that is not kind of given its own spotlight, it's an important role that we can play, is to try to shine that light where it's just too dim. So thank you for those observations and reflections, Joel and Susanna. Is there anyone else that would like to speak about or from Latin America?
Hello, I'm Rafa from Costa Rica. I am supporting the Clarician mission in Latin America. And I would like to offer you a personal reflection. Behind the scenes in this climate crisis situation, in this poverty and hunger and lack of water and migration situation, which we can see here all the time. Recently, we were participating in a bishop meeting in Panama, and it was a meeting of bishops at border regions, and they were explaining that they welcomed around 3,000 migrants every day who cross the jungle, fleeing from abuse, from violence, and they are coming even from Africa, from Asia, from Oceania, from South America, from the Caribbean. So what is behind the scenes? What is the background of all this? And it is the type of economy that we are being ruled by. And our Pope has mentioned it once and again. It is an economy of death. It's an economy that marginalizes, an economy that leaves astray millions of people on the street. So until we really approach the economic system in depth, we are just trying to mend holes in a dress that is falling apart, because there are economic interests that are very strong and that are going to keep on supporting war, which is a business, And there are very important economic interests that don't care about destroying the earth if they earn by doing it. So we should be giving an impulse to an economy of life, an economy of the common good, an economy that respects the dignity of all people. So I don't know how we can do this from our endeavors, from our missions. How can we cry out loud so that there is awareness of the need of a change in our way of organizing the economy, which is impregnated in the constitution of each country. Every country is, according to their constitution, they should be looking for the common good, and the economy should be at the service of that common good, especially for the most vulnerable who are really suffering under these circumstances. When we come back home, we have a roof over our heads, we have food on our table, but those people whom we serve, they mostly lack of all of that. And they arrive at the border with the United States and they are sent back to their countries to continue their suffering because they don't have anything at all. This is my reflection. I wanted to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raphael. And I would encourage you to continue to use that beautiful language in any development setting, even in a UN meeting, speaking about economy of life, economy of the common good, economy that respects human dignity. These are principles that are so important to us in our own Catholic social teaching, but also have a lot of value to share even in secular settings. And I think you make an important point about the core of the way that we understand development. In the UN system, we often refer to kind of 3 pillars of development, one being economic, one being social, and one being environmental. And in my experience, I think if we were to move to the mindset, the perspective that we need to heal our whole planet, I think we would, instead of thinking those as 3 different pillars that stand alone, we would understand better that the economy is meant to be of service to the relationship between humans in human society and the relationship between human society and the rest of the living world. And so it's not really 3 separate pillars, but kind of I almost want to think of 3 layers to a foundation, with the flourishing of the environment and the natural world as a base upon which we can build flourishing of human society. And all of that is served or held together by what we call the economy, but that it can't really be understood as a separate good by itself. It's only good in as much as it serves equity and justice and healthy relationships between humans and between humans and the natural world. So thank you for bringing up the kind of a core challenge in our development conversations. I also see the hand of Cesar Londoña Porras. Cesar?
Good morning. From Peru. I would like to point out that the topic of the economy is very important. You ask us to offer our recommendations, and I believe that Peru has going through a good economical development, and that led to poverty diminishing in our country. Of course, the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, put a stop to that, and poverty grew again. But Peru is really working towards improving the economic growth. But it is important that that economic growth corresponds to certain legal rules that apply to investment. And this is very linked to education. The access to education has improved, but this access has not been given equally to all. That means people with better means have access to private schools. And this includes the religious private schools. And at the same time, if we look at the diversification of the economy, we saw that this diversification aims at the population not living only of one source, like Venezuela, who was based, the economy in Venezuela was based on oil. And here in Peru, we are trying to diversify, and we are focusing on the agriculture, on tourism, on fishing, and different activities. And I also think that our countries need to work on productivity. And this includes educating professionals so that they are more able to design our economy and our development goals in a better way. I agree. I also agree with Brother Joel from Brazil. He mentioned that South America needs to be a country of peace. We need to be educated in peace. I believe it is very important because, unfortunately, in South America, there is not a lot of political stability, and this instability is not helping. And if we add to that we also have regional conflicts, we are moving backwards, and this is not contributing to the SDGs. Happily, South America is I wish that South America becomes a continent of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. And again, we come back to the idea of education, the role of education in creating, not only preparing young people to move into industry in the way that it has been shaped by past understanding of development, but to create young people who are prepared to redefine development and to recreate economy in new forms that can create a culture of peace. Wonderful. So I see two more hands from Latin America. We'll go first to Rosa Maria Troques and then to Norbe Tapiero. Rosa Maria.
I feel very connected to each one of the people that talked before. But I believe that we need to find the guiding thread that runs through all the SDGs. I believe that, oh, sorry. Sorry, I can't translate. Isabel, can you mute your microphone, please? So I'm talking from Honduras, and the reality in our country is similar to other Latin American countries. Corruption is very deeply rooted in our government. And we have just gone through a situation that is very present in every country. In our country, we have we had a government that has been brought to justice in the United States for corruption and drug trafficking. And this is incarnated in our reality. And that means all the objectives are fall short. Because if we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030, this is impossible if we don't go to the primary source, which is corruption in the government. And it is very risky. In every country, we are really involved in fighting corruption in our realities. But we realize that what is the reason for immigration to happen? What is the reason of the lack of education? Because very few are robbing away our resources. So why should we assume the responsibility after the disaster we had just now in Honduras, where we had a push, first of all, and then a pandemic, and now a government that is very deeply involved in criminality and drug trafficking. This is very difficult. And that's why we still need to fight for the SDGs, but we need to find where the source of the problems are. Where is the root that does not allow us to evolve, to achieve our goals by 2030? What is hindering us from constructing this new world that we want? And of course, we embrace hope, and we still believe that it is possible, but we need to go back to the roots of the problems. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Father Norbey. I'm in Medellin, in Colombia. And our experience here in regards to SDGs in Colombia, here we have a big violence problem. There is an armed conflict between the Colombian state and the revolutionary forces, the FARC, and other armed actors. And so we are trying to get rid of violence, of a culture of violence that has been installed here for 60 years. And we are trying to evolve towards peace. But we realize that despite the fact that Colombia has improved and has started to tackle the problem of poverty, we have a progressive government which is trying really to invest in against poverty and to improve the health conditions of the rural population, but it is not easy. It is not easy, and I believe that something that has helped was a strategy to cooperate with other neighboring countries. That has allowed us to move forward and to advance the SDGs. We are working with Brazil and other neighboring countries to protect the Amazon, for example, and this is giving us hope. If they are able to establish common policies among different countries, not just for the Amazon, this gives us hope. And another point that I believe to be very important is that we had a terrible drought, lack of water some months ago, and it was terrible here in Bogota and in other cities in the country. And now civil society is starting to be aware of the fact that we need to take care of natural resources. We need to protect nature, to do something against climate change. And I think it is positive that civil society has realized that. And I am I'm happy that the church and the Claretians, like myself, are already involved in this and can offer civil society some initiatives and actions and programs to raise awareness. We already started a way of fighting against mining companies, etc., because I am in a very rich area. We have water resources, we have rivers, and it is nice that civil society now wants to work with us to preserve all that. Because of course the government is always saying that they are going to achieve sustainable development and they are going to improve living conditions and they are going to create jobs, etc. But we know that they cannot have the solution by themselves. We need to raise awareness in our communities so that they participate, and this is very, very interesting. It is very important that civil society also faces big companies, big mining companies, or in our region, we also are much based on agriculture, and we were providing most of Colombia with bananas, for example. And we also have some tourism here, which has been promoted after reaching a peace agreement, because but of course peace is very fragile at the moment. And so we hope that we can continue moving forward towards the SDGs. We believe in this country that, we believe in this government that seems to be establishing social policies towards social justice. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was having some trouble on my end with connection. Are people able to hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Very good. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's good enough now. And thank you, Norbe, for your sharing. I did hear your comments and think I agree that we can look to collaboration across borders as an important source of hope and optimism, especially where it's very possible to identify that we have common challenges and common hopes for achievement of the SDGs and even more than what we see in the SDGs. And I think you also brought up another important point that was mentioned earlier in the call about the need to emphasize rural populations as having special challenges and being at risk for being left behind in all the different goals. And that's another important area to focus on. Thank you very much. Now, I know we haven't heard yet from anyone in Europe or Asia Pacific because we have very few countries from those regions that are reporting this year, but do we have anyone who would like to speak perhaps from Spain or Nepal about your reflections from your region? And it's okay if not, no pressure. Yes, Smita, please, from Nepal.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. And attending this meeting, listening to, I was just waiting when the Asia's time is going to come. And so meaning to say, that means from Asia, which are the countries, Teresa, reporting apart from Nepal?
I think Nepal is the only one that we have delegates from, other than like the Middle East. We have Israel as well, although our delegate from there is not on the call today. So it may be just you from the Asia.
Okay, so that makes it imperative for me to speak. So actually for me, it's the first time, and I was so happy to listen to the both African context and the Latin America, both. It was like, though the Rosa, I think, though she was speaking, the same thing applies to in my context as well. So after coming back, I just made a contact in the so many reflective questions that you had posed. We cannot but reflect on those questions. So you are really persistent as you prayed. So you are persistent in helping us to work. So I did contact with because it's close by. So Nepal Planning Commission, we had one of our parents who visited us. So through him, I came to know they have already come up with a 5 years plan in which they have clear plans to make this SDGs work. It's only in the book. And then since I am not at the grassroots level, I am not fully aware of grassroots informations. And the another meetings that took place was the Nepal National SDG Framework. There is a commission responsibilities given to NGO Federation of Nepal. So where there was a meeting on 4th of April, and there I realized from the reports that the government representatives or the collaboration is missing. As like we all of us shared, there were 85 NGOs being represented, and from Nepal Planning Commission, they presented, but they are only specifically focusing on SDGs 5, 12, and one more. So 3 SDGs, we seem to gender equality. I am also aware we have made a lot of progress in terms of the latest, the election commission. After that, in all the leaders, now women representatives are there. So they are only talking in bits and pieces, few SDGs, but like someone said, we need the guiding thread, like, involving or evaluating the progress of all the SDGs. So I see all this, whatever we shared, same thing applies to me. And I too am more encouraged to do more reading and following it up. Since I am full-time on a mission, though it is my passion to get involved, but still I will find my time to be able to attend the meetings and then to do follow-up. And thank you so much to all those who shared, and to Teresa especially.
Thank you, Smita, for being our representative of Asia Pacific, if you can believe, from such a huge region, but just the one country reporting this year. And thank you for your connections that you made to other regions as well. Is there anyone else that would like to speak from Europe, which the lone country, basically the lone country there is Spain that we have delegates from, but I'm not sure if there's anyone from Spain on the call today. Okay. Very good. Well, I want to thank you all for those very rich reflections. And because you had so many excellent things to say, we won't spend as much time today on the other rounds of sharing that we had mentioned, which was your experience of making contact with civil society networks in your countries. But I will say, I already heard from several of you that you have attempted to make contact with the network in your country. And many of you have also attempted to join the team that will respond to your government's report in July, and have met challenges along the way, that you have not been able to get a response, or maybe you just haven't heard about next steps in the process. So I just want to let you know, I will be following up with every point of contact that I know from those who are organizing the responses to the government reports here in New York. and I will ask them on your behalf about, how is the process moving forward and how can you begin to be a part of it, as especially if you have already submitted the form saying that you wanted to contribute to the response to your government. I will follow up with them and try to make sure that you do get a response from them. So just look for an update from me on that process if you are someone who tried to join that team for your country. And then in terms of making contact with your civil society networks, I know that has presented some challenges for many of you also. In general, my advice, if you have sent information by email or by phone and you have not been able to get a response, a next step that you might consider trying would be to see if there's a social media account for the network that you want to contact. Especially just look for anything that looks active. It could be either Facebook or Twitter are the ones that seem to be the most active, Twitter or X, as it is now called. So if you're struggling to get a response in other ways, you might try that way. But we will continue to discuss that as we prepare for our next call. So I will follow up with you more on that. And as a reminder, and I will share this again, I do have a directory of links that you can see on the screen here to the civil society networks that I have found, mostly by searching the internet. And so if you have not yet attempted to make contact with a network in your country, I hope that you will try to do that very soon. And if you don't succeed at first, I hope you will continue to try other methods that I just mentioned. And as you can see, it's quite a long list as we have all of your countries included here. I'll skip ahead to that. And before I move on to giving you a basic sense of how we will present our reflections in a similar way to today, but with more specific focus on the SDGs that are our themes, I first want to ask, beyond what I just said about contacting civil society networks or about joining the team to respond to your government, does anyone have any questions that it would be helpful for me to answer for you right now?
May I, Teresa?
Please.
I was just thinking you had sent a lot of links, which are, I think, I was just trying to listen. I think these meetings took place at the UN, and it is they are 9 hours, 3 hours. So I was just trying to fast forward and see somewhere where Asia or Nepal, I was trying to. So, but then it may be difficult for you as well, I suppose, because you deal with the whole world. Is there any alternatives for us? We may have to scan through the whole video to get what we really want, Teresa? Sorry for this question.
No, it's a very good question. And I encourage you to scan and fast forward because the meetings are very long and I expect most of you do not have an entire day to dedicate or multiple days to following hours and hours of recording. So if you're able to kind of quickly move through a video, or sometimes even YouTube will help to identify kind of specific parts or points in a recording with different themes. If you want to skip ahead, I encourage that in the same way that later in our process, you will all be looking at the written reports from your governments on SDG progress. And some of them will be very short and some of them will be 200 pages or more. And no one expects you to read over 200 pages, unless you are really fascinated by it and you want to read 200 pages. And so in the same way, then I will encourage you to kind of find the specific topics and specific points of interest to you, and then focus on that. So yeah, don't try not to be overwhelmed by how long the recordings are or the meetings are, but just try to look for what is interesting, and what is most connected to your experience and your ministry, because that's, you know, that's the place where you will want to interact and comment the most. And Melba, I see your hand also.
Yes, I have a question about the SDG Lab. Will it be after the HLPF or during or after? I'm not clear about that. So the lab is going to help us to plan our way forward after the forum. Is it going to be a kind of a way of advising us how to proceed, how to move forward? Because we are supposed to participate in the HLPF itself. And so the lab is going to take place afterwards, not during the forum from the 8th to the 16th. So what are the mechanisms for us to realize what is happening in the UN, those who are not going to be able to be in person in New York? So that is my question. I don't know.
Very good question. Thanks, Melba. So while we will have, some of us will be in New York for the forum itself in the middle of July, we will have our online sessions that we are calling the SDG Lab will be after the forum itself and all online. And we are having it after the forum this year because, as Melba said, we want to give everyone, both in New York and who is joining online, the chance to experience as much of the forum itself as possible. And then when we have the SDG Lab afterward, you can integrate some of the ideas that you have gathered. You can reflect on the presentation that your government made during the forum, and bring those ideas together in reflecting afterward. And the objective there, obviously, as you can tell, since it is afterward, it's not an input to the forum itself, but rather an input for our ongoing conversation with governments who have reported at the forum. Because the way to understand this forum is it's a routine point of checking in or giving an update. And the work is meant to be continuous. So we will gather our thoughts and our reflections in the SDG Lab after the forum, and then work to bring those ideas and reflections to governments to say, okay, just because the forum is over, this is not the time now you can rest because your report is finished. But to say, okay, so now you have reported, we understand where we are in this moment. And now back to work, now back to making progress, and back to keeping the promises of the SDGs. And so it's our way of gathering ideas to follow up with governments and to keep the pressure and to carry the momentum from the forum forward. And so with that introduction, I will say a little bit more about the structure of the lab, just as our final input for today. So the labs themselves will take the form of 5 Zoom calls in the same format, kind of as our gathering on Zoom for these calls. And we will have one call dedicated to each of these thematic SDGs: poverty, hunger and agriculture, 13 on climate action, 16 on good governance, 17 on partnerships for sustainable development. And so that will happen the week of the 22nd to the 26th of July. And so we'll do one session each day, starting with goal number 1 on the 22nd, and then proceeding through the week with goal number 2, goal number 13, goal number 16, goal number 17. And so you, as participants, as delegates to this forum, will be invited to speak in one or more of these sessions, whichever you prefer, and to offer your comments and reflections. And you might start thinking about now which of the SDGs you would like to speak and reflect on. And one way you might kind of choose your focus is by looking at what specific projects or ministries you are involved in that relate or connect or contribute to one of these SDGs. Because the different ways that you can provide your input to the session will be, you can offer reflections on the government report. You can simply offer your own observations on progress toward that particular SDG. Or you can talk about a project of yours or your congregations that is contributing to the achievement of that SDG. So you don't have to kind of have everything organized just yet, but I wanted to present the idea for you to begin thinking about now. And we will gather again at the end of May 20th, for our next call as a group. So between now and then, here are the key points to focus on. If you haven't done so already, keep trying to make contact with the civil society network that is monitoring SDG progress in your country. Keep trying to engage with the process of the VNR or civil society team that will respond to your government. And I will try my best to make sure that if you signed up for the team, that they connect with you. I will try to make sure that connection happens. And then to begin reflecting and gathering your own ideas, your details, if you have images or videos that you might like to share as part of your input during the SDG labs. And then some of you, we already had one call for just the delegates from a particular region. We had one for Africa already. We will have one for Latin America coming up. That will be on May 17th. So you should have received an email from me about that last week if you are in Latin America. And then for the very few people who are in either Europe or Asia Pacific, we will try to arrange an opportunity for you to meet as well, even though it's a much smaller number. So again, our next call as a whole group will be the 20th of May, and it will be at the same time as today. And I will be in communication with you between now and then, just with a reminder of all of this information, all of these links. I will send them to you as usual in all 4 languages that we have on this call, both the slides and the recordings. So you can revisit all of these details as often as you need. Is there any final question as we conclude for today?
Yes, sorry, I do have a question. Maybe I'm causing you, Teresa, to work more, but how do we know when the reports of each country are ready? how do we know that our country has published the VNR?
Good question. So unfortunately, they are able to publish their reports very late. So usually we do not receive the reports until the middle of June. Sometimes it's even the end of June if they really push it. But I will discuss in our next call in May, I will give specific instructions about where you can find the report from your government when it is published. But for now, they are not available, so we don't need to worry about that yet, but we will talk about it next time we are together. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for being together for this nice long conversation. It was a pleasure to hear and learn from so many of you. I hope you also feel you learned from one another. And I will look forward to seeing all of you again on the 20th of May. And some of you I will see sooner for calls for your region. So please, as always, watch your mailbox for messages from me, and we will continue to prepare together. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful remainder of your day or your night. And great thanks to our team of interpreters, Anna, Vivian, and Jessica. Thank you so much for your wonderful work.